Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Analia Schleger dos Santos. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I get the pleasure of co-chairing the International Policy Committee with U.S. Climate Action Network. We have an amazing group of panelists today, and we are going to be focusing on the effects of militarism and war in these climate spaces. Global warming is already surpassing 1.5 degrees Celsius, yet after 1 week of negotiations, progress in Bonn is sorely lacking. The situation is further compounded by the U.S. bombing of Iran, a move that dangerously escalates global conflict and undermines climate action. It is related to efforts within the United States to erode democracy, target and expel immigrants, and suppress protest. Speakers will offer reflections on the lack of negotiation breakthroughs, the stark choice between conflict and justice that is profoundly affecting our climate future, and the erosion of democracy and civic space globally. First, we'll hear from Vibha from Amnesty International USA.
Hi. Although for the first time in 30 years, the US government is not here at the UN Climate Conference, we the people are. We want to highlight that marginalized frontline and fence-line communities that use fossil fuels the least continue to suffer some of the worst impacts on climate change. These include subsistence farmers, indigenous peoples, and those living in low-lying island states threatened by rising sea levels and more powerful storms, or those living beside fossil fuel production and transport facilities. For example, Pakistan contributes less than 1% of greenhouse gas emissions annually, but is one of the countries most vulnerable to climate disasters. Despite the urgency of the climate crisis, those demanding action from the authorities are being harassed, stigmatized, attacked, and criminalized. Around the world, environmental human rights defenders are risking their lives and liberty for defending their lands and communities' right to a healthy environment, such as the warriors for the Amazon in Ecuador. The voices, views, knowledge, and wisdom of indigenous peoples, frontline and fence-line communities, and human rights defenders must be incorporated into climate policies, plans, and actions. High-income, historically high-emitting countries are the most responsible for the climate change and yet continue to shirk their obligations to provide climate finance to lower-income communities to cut emissions and help communities adapt to climate change, as well as providing reparations for loss and damage, which could ease the burden in countries suffering from climate harms. Time and time again, from Baku to Bonn, negotiators are told by global north countries that they cannot find the money for this, and yet when it comes to money for military, they are able to find the money out of thin air. The total greenhouse gas emissions from the US military alone from 2001, when the invasions in Afghanistan began, to 2019 is estimated to be 1,267 million metric tons. For context, in 2017, the Pentagon's US greenhouse gas emissions were greater than those of entire industrialized countries, such as Sweden, Denmark, and Portugal. And as observers and parties here at Bonn call for a just transition for all workers, these same US military emissions are greater than all of the emissions from US production of iron and steel. Lastly, in the shadow of the latest escalations in Iran, we must not allow we must not allow the world to use these military escalations to divert attention away from the ongoing genocide against Palestinians in the occupied Gaza Strip and its illegal occupation of the entire occupied Palestinian territory and its system of apartheid against Palestinians. That repression stems from repression happens both in the US, in Israel, and here even at the climate conference in Bonn. We must stand back against that repression and that shrinking of civic space. Thank you.
Thank you, Vibha. All right, next we're going to hear from Victoria Elizabeth Whalen from Future Generations Tribunal. Go ahead.
Thank you, and apologies in advance. My voice is a bit hoarse. My name is Victoria Elizabeth Whalen, and I'm speaking today as part of the Future Generations Tribunal and the People's Climate Diplomacy Program, but also as someone who has grown up in the sacrifice zones of Georgia and North Carolina, where repression isn't theoretical, it's systemic, it's racialized, and it's lived. We are watching civic spaces shrink, both inside these UN walls and far beyond them. At SB 62, young people and frontline advocates are being surveilled, their signs censored, their badges revoked for merely naming the violence they live under. And it mirrors what's happening in our communities back home. Students suspended for speaking out, organizers labeled as terrorists, deportation rates sweeping through neighborhoods, and forests cleared to build militarized policed compounds. These aren't separate struggles. These tools are used to suppress civil society, are part of the same machinery that profits from fossil fuels, weapons, and war. So let's be clear. Militarism is a climate justice issue. The same governments telling us there's no money for climate finance are spending billions on airstrikes, surveillance, and fossil-fueled militaries. The US military alone emits more than 140 countries combined, and yet its emissions remain largely exempt from international climate reporting. Meanwhile, in 2023, the global military spending surpassed $2.4 trillion, and when we ask for funding for just transitions, for indigenous land back, for adaptation, for reparations, we're told the money does not exist. But somehow, that money appears overnight for war. It's printed, borrowed, or freed up with a single policy stroke, while our movements are told to wait, to be patient, and to trust the process. But the same governments telling us to trust the process are actively undermining it with bombs, extraction, and with debt. How can we talk about phasing out fossil fuels when militarism is being phased in? As a young person, I was told to believe in international cooperation, but the climate crisis demands more than belief. It demands courage, and it demands honesty, and it demands that we confront the fact that war is incompatible with planetary survival. We need global just transitions that are not just green, but demilitarized, decolonialized, and debt-free. We need a global just transition mechanism that explicitly phases out military emissions, ends war profiteering, and funds the communities that have been sacrificed at every turn. That means canceling illegitimate debt. That means ending impunity for environmental crimes. That means funding transitions led by the Global South, not controlled by the Global North, especially when in the United States we have our own internal Global South, the Black, brown, indigenous, low-income, and coastal communities who continue to bear the brunt of extraction and neglect. The climate crisis is not just about carbon. It's about power, and if we don't confront the violence that underpins the system, whether it's airstrikes abroad or police crackdowns at home, there will be no justice, no peace, and no livable future for our generations or for the next to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. Next, we're going to hear from Jairo Garcia from Southeast Climate and Energy Network.
Good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Jairo Garcia. I'm with the Southeast Climate and Energy Network of USCAN. Our mission is to work with communities across the southeast of the United States to help these communities be more resilient and adaptable to the impacts of existing climate change. Do that through policy and education. Last week, my brother Jacob Jones, unfortunately he's not here with us this week, shared a thought that deeply resonated with me. He said, perhaps it's a good thing that the United States is not here. Because if they are not here, they cannot sabotage the negotiations. But more importantly, is demanding other nations to take the leadership. It's time to the rest of the world to take the leadership that the United States is denied, or is refusing to continue. Jacob's comment struck me like core because it reveals a profound truth. We must look beyond the surface, beyond the narratives, and questions the systems that is at play. Most like the movie The Wizard of Oz. How many of you have seen The Wizard of Oz? You haven't seen? Take a look. We just see a projection of a big monster and scary monster. But behind that facade is just a distraction, because behind that curtain lies a fragile, failing system, clinching for power, using tactics of misdirection and deceptive to survive. So are you here in this conference to let's put the curtain down? As we have been mentioned here, the war is just a distraction. It's just a distraction of what is happening with climate change. The war comes, there will be a lot of suffering, it will end, but the planet that right now we are putting in risk, it won't be able to survive. Us survives. The planet will survive, but not us. So whatever is banning the terms here at the conference, or cultural wars, or endless noise, the goal is divert our attention to what, as Victoria mentioned, is the goal of the fossil fuel companies. It's exactly what they want, to distract the forces, to distract us and to divide us in what we know that they are losing the war, and they are losing the war in climate change. We are winning. Now, today, renewable energy is cheaper than fossil fuels. We know that. The technologies are better and more efficient. They cannot deny it. They don't have the economics and they don't have the numbers to deny it. So they had to go to distractions, such as war. It's a distraction. Obviously, at the same time, we must recognize that the interconnectedness, the struggles across the globe. We must condemn the atrocities in Ukraine, in Gaza, inside the United States. Yet, as we do so, we must not lose sight of our purpose here in this conference, and to move the negotiations forward with integrity, ensuring that they are inclusive and just. We must focus in achieving meaningful outcomes, reparations for loss and damages, inclusive financial mechanisms, and socially fair solutions like equitable carbon markets. These are just abstracts and concepts. They are not just abstracts and concepts, but they are lifelines for the communities and ecosystems more affected by climate change. So let us remain vigilant and then terminator. Together, we can see through the illusion, dismantle the unjust system that is presented in front of us, and build a future rooted in fairness, justice, and sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Jairo. Next, we're going to hear from Mariama Williams with the Chisholm Legacy Project's Global Afro-Descendants for Climate Justice Collaborative. Mariama?
Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I guess I need to do something. All right. So I must say I concur fully with all that's been said before me, and I'm really glad that you all made the connections to the ongoing discussion in terms of just transition, finance, and so forth, because I won't be making that. I want 2 points to make, well, at least 3. One is the point I want to connect to the previous panel, that what we're seeing is not a one-off, isolated thing by a madman. That there was a document written under the neocons in the US, and they projected getting rid of 7 countries in 5 years. It's taken them 30 years, but and Iran was the last. Iraq, Afghanistan, they've outlined it. It's not an accident, okay? So let's be very clear on that. Go look for it. 7 countries, 5 years. And most of it instigated by Netanyahu using the US political establishment, right? So it's a very coordinated plan. Will they achieve what they want with Iran? They did Syria, they did Iraq, they did Afghanistan, and so forth. We don't know, and that's where we have to be conscious. My other point is that this is also a practice, this idea that you could go in and take what you want for the African continent. And as Afro-descendant, you already see, and you could look, if you look at the projections about the necessity of claiming and having access to the minerals and all the transition fuels in Africa, the US has 800 bases all over the world, okay? And many of them are now in Africa. What they get away with now, they will be doing that in Africa and in other places where countries are trying to hold on to their sovereignty and trying to control the resources that are there. Make no mistake about it. It's very deliberate, okay? If you see the coalition of the EU, UK, Germany, France, and the US, very deliberate. So as an African descendant, and on the voice of all of the African descendants in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, we already see in Latin America where Afro-descendants were pushed on marginal lands, they're getting killed for those marginal lands on the grounds of climate to foster biofuel plantations and so forth. So this war is going on everywhere, and people are getting killed every day. Right? So let's be very clear. Please go do your research. It's there. They have not hidden it. Okay? I want to speak specifically about the cost of military missions. Because this week's bombing cost hundreds of millions of dollars, emitted 10,000 tons of CO2, and worsens our deficit in the US by at least $1.6 trillion. All the while, the administration is slashing healthcare, education, and climate funding. We must ask, which future are we funding? Are we funding a future for our well-being? Are we funding a future of continued rampant colonialism and militarism for the service and in the service of billionaires, whether they're 30 or 40 or 50? We also need to, from this planet, this place, recognize that military emission was initially excluded, successfully lobbied by the US to exclude it from emissions from national reporting, citing national security concerns. The Paris Agreement did remove that exception, but it did not mandate military emissions reporting. It's voluntary, and most all countries still emit from national greenhouse inventories their military emission. Yet we know that large-scale military fuel, whether it's on the battlefield or bombing, systematically the CO2 that they produce are being not officially counted. We talk about net zero, but net zero from what? When military is ongoing. So the military emissions gap, according to experts who are looking at military, is about 5 to 6% of global emission. Even limited airstrikes campaign contribute millions of tons, with full-scale bombardment and wreckage adding tens of millions. Climate costs include black carbon, particulate pollution, land fires, and fossil fuel facility destruction, which impacts and hampers most conflict recovery and drive long-term environmental damage. So this is very much part of what we're here for, right? So when we exclude warfare from national inventories, we're weakening global climate mitigation, and we're neglecting the carbon footprints of geopolitical violence. And I want to speak specifically to the US bombing of Iran. The estimated costs are still coming out, but the immediate military expenditure of Operation Midnight Hammer, I mean, amazing, deploying 7 B-2 bombers, 125 aircrafts, 75 precision munition and tomahawks. And while the exact cost is still pending, the past data suggests that a single B-2 sortie costs roughly $130,000 per hour, plus $600,000 per bomber and bomber-busting bomb. Therefore, these strikes will likely cost hundreds of millions of dollars, possibly 300 to 600 million. And the long-term cost, as the War Project at Brown University estimate, that the Iraqi-Syria cost $2.9 trillion, Afghanistan, $2.3 trillion. So the budgetary estimates of the, when you look at the Trump era deficit, it's going to put up the US deficit by at least $2.8 trillion. So this war is impacting not just the US, but all of us. I'm from a small island. Rising emissions mean sea level rise. It means heat, trapping many of women and children across there's now increasing report, not just about the heat, but also the possibilities of what that heat does to the community, to water, to sanitation, and so forth. So these are serious matters that are the concerns of every one of us, every single one of us. And we need to advocate right in here that military emissions be mandatory, and we need to push developing countries. When they talk about not enough money and they don't have budget, and you must go to the private sector, they are funding genocide across the world. And as an Afro-descendant, I am very careful and very alert to the fact that these things, they're practicing it, and they will be doing that to every African country that has resources that they want, and they will take it. And so we need to be very wary of that and to begin to do our homework. It's not about just now, but they have a long-term strategy. It's not one single thing that they just happen to do. Trump is not just some madman. He's carrying out a mission. Okay? So, thank you. Sorry about my preaching, but.
No problem.
Okay.
Thank you, Mariama. We will now open it up to the audience for any questions, particularly from any press present. And you have a microphone available, so just introduce yourself and then make sure you direct your question to one of the panelists.
Yeah, thanks for your insights into this. I'm Aaron Greyblock from Greenpeace Media, former journalist as well, but I'm following the G20 at the moment, and the South African presidency is talking about critical minerals and retaining the wealth or the resources, the benefits from that within Africa. And obviously, you know, we've seen Ukraine and we've seen the issue between the US and Ukraine on those critical minerals. How would you then see the South African push to retain that the benefits for local communities?
So I'm glad that it was raised, and I think it's something that the African Union and all of the African countries have to come to some agreement on, and and also about how they defend each other, or they come to the defense of each other, because of course they'll be picking people off one by one. They'll start in the Sahel with Traoré and those countries that are seen as troublemakers, and they'll make their way across the continent. So, and we also have to push to get the U.S. military out of Africa, get those bases out of Africa and other places. And I think also working with CARICOM and working with all of the countries around the world to really bring these statistics and these intentions in. Because the research is there. The U.S. military is one of the best places to find the research. They do the research. NATO also has done a lot of research on that. So we're not in the dark on this, and there are a significant amount of people who have been doing some of these research. So I think it's a matter of being aware of it and supporting South Africa and coming up wherever we are, always bringing these cases into bear and pointing out what is the plan and what's afoot. Right? And holding countries such as the EU that's been parading for however long I've been in this process about human rights, about whatever. And I think one of the things that's been done with Trump is that he's laid bare the perfidy of the liberalism and across the world, because it's not just Trump, right? The genocide is supported strongly, just as strongly, by the UK, by France, by Germany, and by many other developed countries, Australia and others, you know. So I think we have our work cut out for us, but we can't dig our head in the sand, because the trouble is not just going to stay in Palestine. It's not just going to stay, you know, my heart bleeds for the Palestinians, but it's going to be coming, yeah. And as people who, I write from people with the slave trade, they came, they took, and now we are even more repressed where we are. In Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, we are at the margins of society. And we see climate gentrification in Haiti, in the US, in Miami, Florida. The Haitian community they were pushed to what was seen as undesirable areas of Miami. And now those areas, because of sea level rise, the big mansions on the lower levels, those rich people are now coming into Little Haiti and building and buying houses and pushing out the Haitians. So we have climate gentrification. We give them all kind of fancy name. Same old thing, all right? Same old things. So, sorry. But anyway, yeah.
Thank you, Mariama. Do we have any more questions? All right, I'd like to remind everyone that U.S. Climate Action Network is the largest network made up of more than 170 civil society organizations in the United States, and we are working to address the climate crisis. USCAN's mission is to build trust and alignment among members to fight climate change in a just and equitable way. And one more reminder that none of us are free until we are all free. Thank you, everyone.